this is for real. Good afternoon. My name is John Herbst. I run the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council. It's my pleasure to be here today with you. Thank you all for coming, both those who are here in person and those who are here virtually, to see our report on water insecurity in Central Asia, an extremely important subject. It's been an extremely important subject since at least the early 1960s, if not before. The report has been prepared for your consideration. We have a wonderful group of panelists who will talk about their report, and then we'll have a moderated discussion. And our panelists include Sarah Cameron, an associate professor of history at the University of Maryland. She is working on a book right now called The Aral Sea: Environment, Society, and State Power in Central Asia. She has held fellowships at the Davis Center for Historical Studies at Princeton and the Klug Center at the Library of Congress and the Rachel Carson Center for Environment and Society in Munich, Germany, as well as the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. She received her PhD from Yale University. Also with us, but virtually, is Ariel Cohen, a senior fellow here at the Atlantic Council. He is a member of the Council of Foreign Relations, and he has been a recognized authority on international security and energy policy on Russia, Eurasia, and the Middle East for literally 4 decades, if not more. Our third speaker will be Wesley Alexander Hill, the Assistant Director and Lead Analyst for the Energy Growth and Security Program at the International Tax and Investment Center. Wesley is an expert on grand strategy, geoeconomics, and international relations with a regional specialization in China, Eurasia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. He has unique expertise in Chinese influence in Central Asia and the Sino-American energy competition. Finally, we have, last but certainly not least, Wilder Alejandro Sanchez. He is an analyst who focuses on geopolitical, trade, defense, and security issues across the Western Hemisphere, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia, which means about 3/4 of the world. He is president of the Second Floor Strategies, a consulting firm based in Washington, and a freelance writer for the defense news agencies Breaking Defense, Janes, and Shepherd Media. So we're going to start with the report. I'll get off the stage, and then we'll have our moderated conversation. Thank you all again for coming.
So good morning, everybody. Thank you all very much for joining us in this very important event. I wanted to start by talking about a lot of the regional dynamics and what inspired us to look at this report. Most people, when they conjure images of water insecurity, they think of sand dunes, they think, oh, these are arid landscapes, there's no water, what are we going to do? They think of it in terms of technical problems, they think of it in terms of maybe environmental catastrophes. What really motivated us to look at Central Asian water insecurity was that there is a really important added set of dimensions that need to be accounted for. The first is that there is no solution to these water problems without political solutions to regional problems involving regional integration to a unique degree. This isn't entirely unique to Central Asia. There are other examples all over the world. For example, one might conjure up images of Ethiopia and Egypt having a dispute over the Nile River. But in Central Asia, it takes on another added important dimension because unlike the example I just mentioned, Central Asia has a unique geography. This geography means that every major river source, the downstream countries that we are talking about today, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan, their water sources originate from outside of these countries, Russia, China, Afghanistan. As a result, there is no environmental solution, there is no solution to these issues without a set of political solutions and a set of maxims going forward that can motivate both local actors and the international community. So, when we're talking about this region, that means that in addition to these already 5 state actors, we have to look at 3 additional ones: Russia, China, Afghanistan. I will take them in turn very briefly before I turn to my colleague Alejandro Sanchez, who will talk about in-region dynamics. So first, there is Russia, and to a lesser extent, China. Russia and China both have vested interests in Central Asia, and these interests are conflicting with one another. Russia has seized this region as its backyard. It often resents the loss of control and sovereignty in these countries, and it wants to exercise leverage where it can, including in water. It's no coincidence that when there are disputes about, say, Central Asian countries enforcing sanctions that are levied against Russia, coincidentally, Russia finds a reason to, say, cut off some water supplies that go south. China also has a lot of vested interests in this region. China launched the Belt and Road Initiative in Kazakhstan, and it has talked a lot about investing in local water infrastructure. For example, during the ASEAN summit in May of 2023, it explicitly promised to invest in water. And we cannot forget Afghanistan, where the Taliban government is constructing the Tepa-Kosh Canal, which threatens to cut off or at least severely diminish a lot of the water flow leaving the mountains of the Hindu Kush going north, which is vital for local agriculture and irrigation. So that's the problem laid out, but what can be done? Well, first of all, we should point out that a lot already is being done. So Central Asian countries have already approached China and Russia, and to a lesser extent Afghanistan, and there are attempts at water sharing agreements, there is attempt at cooperation, there is attempt at working together to ensure that none of the issues that we're going to be talking about today result in armed conflict or geopolitical brinksmanship. Some of these initiatives include humanitarian assistance in exchange for less water being drawn in Afghanistan. It includes investment assistance or reciprocity of travel agreements in the case with Central Asian countries and China. And it also includes profit motive-driven business opportunities. Investing in Central Asian water infrastructure and resources isn't a charity project. It can actually be quite profitable. There's plenty of money to be made for not just Chinese and Russian companies, but hopefully American and European companies in doing things like relining canals and many other initiatives that I won't spoil for Alejandro. But what needs to be addressed is that many of these agreements are currently, 1, not specific, 2, they are not binding, as binding as they should be. There may not be an enforcement mechanism. And 3, countries in Central Asia are not evenly contributing to solving this problem. There is no solution to this problem without collective action, and right now, Kazakhstan is doing the most to solve these issues. Uzbekistan, which should have a vital interest, is also doing a lot, but not as much as it should. And we're seeing state capacity issues really hamstring initiatives in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan. And Turkmenistan really is interested in this issue. It is conducting outreach, which if you know anything about Turkmenistan is quite rare, but it is not engaging in multilateral cooperation to the same degree that it says that it actually wants to, or it says that it actually needs to. So with the regional dynamics hinted at and a lot of the more technical problems hopefully introduced, I'm going to pass it off to Alejandro. So Alejandro, please.
Good morning, everyone. One of the reasons I really enjoyed working on this project is because our goal was not solely to analyze the problem, but also we want to provide realistic and rational policy recommendations to the governments of Central Asia and their extra-regional partners. In other words, our recommendations are holistic in nature. We go from local to regional to extra-regional. For example, at the domestic level, we encourage local governments to continue implementing technologies like water measuring systems, drip irrigation, recycling of greywater, and installing pump stations. Moreover, we encourage policymakers to think outside the box and consider incorporating new technologies and initiatives. For example, one project that could be very successful is upgrading canals, reinforcing the bottom of the canals to prevent seepage. Moreover, the tops of the canals can a company or a policymaker, a government can cover the tops of the canals with solar panels, which will provide energy for the pump stations along the canal, while also reducing the evaporation. Kazakhstan's Irtish-Karaganda Canal or the Aris-Turkestan Canal could be testing grounds for these solar panels. Additionally, we stress the need for accountability and transparency. In a region where, unfortunately, there is plenty of corruption and embezzlement, it is critical for governments to show their population that every cent is being properly spent. Auditing water security projects, maybe by hiring an international auditing agency, will help governments gain the trust and confidence of their citizens. Our recommendations also address regional geopolitics and regional bodies. For example, we discussed the present and future of the International Fund for Saving the RLC and the Interstate Commission for Water Coordination. Also, we take note of legal frameworks like the Tehran Convention, which tasked with the environmental protection of the Caspian Sea. Based on our analysis of ongoing water challenges, including the troubling situations of the Caspian Sea and the RLC, it is clear that existing environmental agencies and the frameworks must be revised, if not overhauled. For example, we propose to somehow restructure the Interstate Commission for Water Coordination, which was established back in 1992, or to create a new Central Asia Water Council or Secretariat. We are aware of that national sovereignty and supranationalism are very sensitive topics in Central Asia. Hence, it is unrealistic to assume that a modernized ICWC or some kind of new Central Asia water agency will have an omnipotent mandate across state borders. However, it is clear that for water to be used and shared in a fair manner, some type of overarching structure must exist. And that requires support from an engagement from the 5 Central Asian countries. We also encourage more support for the Dushanbe water process. This is a very unique regional initiative carried out by Tajikistan which focuses exclusively on water issues. Moreover, we discussed the fact that Kazakhstan will host the Central Asian Water Environmental Summit in 2025, this year. Water security must certainly be high in the agenda, and the summit workshops and sideline meetings must occur along with civil society to identify high priority projects. We also encourage Central Asia to engage more with its regional partners who share their concerns in environmental security, like the United States, European Union as a whole, and individual states like the Netherlands and France, and also states like South Korea and Japan. One idea that I have proposed quite a bit and in the past is that we should use the C5+1 format for greater engagement between the United States and Central Asia. Having a ministerial Green 5+1 or a Blue 5+1, whatever name is catchier and more appropriate, will maintain the momentum of close US-Central Asia relations. Moreover, a Green 5+1 or Blue 5+1 with a focus on water security will help diversify Washington's engagement with Central Asia in other areas besides diplomacy, trade, and investment to also include water security and environment. Finally, and we think this is critically important, there has to be a constant dialogue among regional governments, international donors, and supporters, but not just with each other, but also with the local population. This statement sounds quite self-evident here in Washington, D.C. As a critical pillar of democracy and good governance, is that policymakers hear what citizens think and care about. In recent years, the government of Kazakhstan has engaged in a listening state initiative started by President Tokayev. Other regional governments must carry out similar initiatives to discuss with their citizens issues like good governance, budget issues, and transparency. And the same can be said about water security and environmental priorities. The governments of Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan are particularly interested to engage the United States, Europe, and other partners to address water security issues. With that said, I would acknowledge that Uzbekistan's dependency on the water-intensive cotton industry remains. Meanwhile, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan had border clashes very recently, while authoritarian Turkmenistan maintains its policy of neutrality and strong isolationism. In other words, while our report calls for and encourages more unity and cooperation in the region, we also acknowledge that this will be a challenge given regional geopolitics, foreign policy strategies, and domestic priorities. Ultimately, as this report and this event highlights, no individual Central Asian state can achieve total water security and water independence without cooperating with their neighbors and also significantly improving water management. Thank you.
All right. Can everybody hear me? Okay, wonderful. I would like to thank Ambassador Herbst and the Atlantic Council team, Shelby McGee, Andrew Danieri, Alex Walina, and of course the report team, Wesley, Alejandro, and Quinn in our office for doing an excellent job with the report. Thank you very much. Let's jump into the substance. What are we focusing on in the report? For years, Central Asia has been moving towards greater regional integration for economic, cultural, and geopolitical reasons, as it emerged 30 plus years ago from the Soviet imperial domination. Countries pursued their own paths, but there are regional issues, including water, that require coordination, cooperation, and integration. Geopolitically, regional integration enables interstate cooperation in the face of ever-present influence of neighboring actors, such as Russia and China that Wesley mentioned. And if you look at the major water flows, each one from the north, from the east, and from the south has problems. The Ural River, when the water reaches Kazakhstan, is not drinkable. It's not potable. It's full of cadmium and other heavy metals. It needs to be either processed or not used for libation. The Ili River that flows to Lake Balkhash, the Chinese consider it an internal Chinese issue, and only now there are some negotiations about how Kazakhstan can preserve the future of Lake Balkhash and prevent the disaster that the Aral Sea has become. And speaking of Aral Sea, with Afghanistan now building the Kosh-Tepa canal that may take up to 15 to 20% of the Amu Darya flow in a project that Afghanistan, the Taliban government, is implementing without foreign expertise and with its own skills and capabilities. We can only imagine how badly can this go. And in fact, satellite imaging already indicates that some of the water broke out and probably was lost and just dissipated into the ground. And you see this mismanagement of water going back decades. And this is something I hope this report is going to trigger, which is rethinking and contemplation of how disastrous some of the past projects in Central Asia, especially in the Soviet era, have been, what damage it created to water management and to key habitats like the Aral Sea, and how we can avoid such disasters in the future. So looking at the Caspian, Aral, and the Karakum Desert Canal projects, you see that on the Volga, the Soviets built a cascade of hydropower stations when there was a breakneck industrialization in the Soviet Union between the 1930s, shall we say, into the 60s. I grew up in the city called Saratov, and when we arrived there, it was, the fish was abundant, and within a year or two, because of one of the cellulose producing giant plants that was dumping its garbage into the Volga River, the fish disappeared essentially. And generally speaking, the Volga was destroyed, poisoned. You see literary evidence that caviar was abundant in the Tsarist times, and now you have to pay, I don't know, $1,000 an ounce to get black caviar. But what is more worrisome is that the Volga flow being taken into these hydropower station reservoirs, the water evaporates, the water goes to the larger and larger cities, to the industry, and not enough water comes to the Caspian, and the Caspian shrinks. This is very damaging to the transportation development of the Caspian, because from Aktau to Baku, from Turkmenbashi to Baku, all these barge and ship routes depend on the depth of ports. And if the ports are not deep enough, then the whole transportation corridor in the Caspian starts to get messed up. On the Aral, I already mentioned it's an environmental disaster. The salt and the sand is carried by winds from France in the Arctic to the Pacific. So all of Eurasia now is being covered by the salt and the sand from the Aral Sea, that only 10% of it is left, mostly on the Kazakh side and the Uzbek side. They're trying to reforest it, plant trees where there used to be a sea bottom. Also, with the Возрождение Island, where there were burial sites for the Soviet bioweapons program, corpses of animals that were killed in experiments may be uncovered by winds, and the island now is accessible by land, and this is a potential source of epidemics and epidemics for animal species. We saw the massive die out of the Saigak antelope. Over 250,000 antelopes died in Kazakhstan within weeks, and we don't know what that was. It could be that it was a virus or a bacteria from the Soviet experiments. Now, in terms of development of the Amu Darya and Sir Darya rivers for Uzbekistan, Alejandro already mentioned the importance of the cotton industry, and going forward, especially taking into account the disappearance of some of this water because of Afghanistan, the Afghanistan Canal. The question mark remains whether the cotton industry in Uzbekistan is going to be sustainable. So what are the countries doing? Yes, they are talking to each other. There is the International Fund for Saving the Aral Sea that President Tokayev is going to be chairing from last year till 2026. There is One Water Summit that President Macron of France and President Tokayev chaired in Saudi Arabia in December. There are coordinating bodies of water ministers, but based on our research, based on the materials we examined, this is not enough. And now the question is, who are the partners that these C5 countries can work with, because water security impacts domestic politics. Water security is important for stability. It's important for their foreign relations, for economic development, infrastructure, energy security, because in countries like Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan, 90+% of energy generated there is hydro. It's important for their development and for their neighbors. They sell electricity. So our recommendations in the report are addressing a wide range of cross-cutting issues and take a holistic view of water security that is necessary to improve living conditions, the environment, the economies, and the industries, as well as improving the quality of living. And I must add, looking in detail, what is driving this crisis is the rapid population increase. When you go back, I don't know, 100 years, population of the Central Asian region was much smaller, and the water issues were more manageable. I mentioned already the importance of the Trans-Caspian corridor, the international transport route, tighter, and we need water in the Caspian to sustain that. France emerged as an important partner with Suez, which is a huge waterworks company, and the Geological Survey of France signing contracts with Kazakhstan. Japan and Korea traditionally are more involved with Uzbekistan. Israel is more involved with Turkmenistan, again, for historic reasons of investment and economic involvement in Turkmenistan. But the bottom line that you'll see if you read the report, and I strongly recommend that you read it, is that the infrastructure, which is mostly Soviet era, is deteriorating. A lot of water is lost because the modern irrigation technologies are not used, and you have the Soviet era canals or even pre-Soviet traditional canals that are just dug in the ground without any kind of protection from evaporation or dissipation, and moving to pipe distribution of water and drip irrigation and sprinklers will save probably 50% of the water consumption and will move the region to a much more balanced water management. For that, my personal opinion is that the water coordination body on the level of water ministers needs to be kicked up, either on the level of first deputy prime ministers or on the level of prime ministers. Water is now the blood of this region, of this economy, and without resolving the water crises, the region will not be able to develop properly. And I think it's a chance for Kazakhstan to take a leadership role, and it's doing that. And I already mentioned the Ili River, the Ural River, and the Amu Darya and Sir Darya management vis-a-vis Afghanistan. I would also add that the costs of modernization that I'm talking about, moving to piped water, moving to sprinkler and drip irrigation, the bills will be in billions of dollars. And then with our recent events with USAID, the question is who will take leadership? And you know how it is. There's no, nature abhors vacuum. If it's not going to be the US, it's going to be somebody else. Best case scenario, if it's not us, it's the Europeans. Worst case scenario, it's the Chinese. Because I kind of don't think the Russians have the sophistication and the experience to lead in this massive undertaking. So I would urge our decision makers to think through, maybe if it's not USAID, maybe it's the Millennium Corporation, maybe it's other international developmental organizations, but we need to work with the governments of the 5 Central Asian countries, taking into account their differences and their peculiarities, shall we speak. Having said that, the regional integration and cooperation is ongoing. It's objectively predicated on the region coming to its own in terms of transportation, attraction of investment, improving the quality of life for the people. And therefore, I think water is going to be, but for years and for decades, front and center in the economic and social development of Central Asia. I should stop here. Thank you.
Is there steps over that side? Okay, that was a wonderful presentation, if a bit beyond schedule. So that means we've now got 26 minutes to have a moderated conversation and hopefully to have some conversation with the audience as well. I'll cut my questions short to give at least a few questions to the audience, both virtual and here. So, Dr. Cameron, we'd like to have your reaction to the report first, and then we'll proceed.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's a great pleasure to read such a detailed and comprehensive report about such an important issue. We don't hear enough, actually, about water issues in Central Asia, so I'm really pleased to read the report. I'm also pleased because I've spent a lot of time actually in the region recently looking at a lot of these issues on the ground. I've been to Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Turkmenistan. And I think the report really nicely highlights how water actually has what they call a lot of knock-on effects, right? This isn't really just about water. This is about regional security. This is about infrastructure. This is about energy, foreign policy, human health. So it's a really wide-ranging issue. I would also underscore that actually I think there's huge potential for cooperation, investment on these issues of water, climate, and the environment. I can give 2 examples from my kind of personal experience in the region. One institution I would highlight, the Kazakh German University. They have a master's in integrated water resource management, and they're training a lot of amazing specialists in this field. It's an entirely English-speaking master's. A lot of these people now are forming kind of the upper echelons of water expertise in the region. They run an Aral Sea summer school, which I was fortunate to participate in, where they take young people, young water professionals, different nationalities, they get them talking to each other, they take them around the Aral Sea. So that's one example of kind of energy. The second one I would highlight is I was fortunate enough to get to Turkmenistan in June. And it's very difficult to get to Turkmenistan. And often Turkmenistan is depicted as a very closed place. But I think if it's one of degrees, this is an issue, water and climate, where definitely there is some interest in international cooperation from the Turkmen. When I had these meetings in Turkmenistan with several universities, they sat me down and they said, look, this is your interest, we have something to talk about. So I found that actually kind of exciting and interesting. 2 things I'll just sort of stress more from the report. One is the issue of the Koçtepe Canal came up already. This is a really big issue for people in the region. And I think people, it particularly would affect Turkmenistan or Uzbekistan because the canal is constructed on the Amu Darya. And I think there's a lot of uncertainty also because many people in the region have not, the projections for exactly how much it may affect these countries are not yet sort of in place. They don't really know. When I was in Turkmenistan, their view was that it would affect Uzbekistan more simply because of the river flow and because Uzbekistan is more populous, but there's a great deal of uncertainty about that. Second point I would stress is the report advocated for strengthening regional water agencies, and I absolutely agree with that. Sometimes the International Fund for Saving the Aral Sea, IFAS as it's known, is seen as an agency that's sometimes underfunded and not that influential, right? It's not able to carry a lot of clout. They've also struggled at times to get all 5 states to partner together. So Kyrgyzstan actually has frozen its participation in IFAS. So it might be worth thinking also, thinking about strengthening that organization and also what are its goals, right? Well, saving the Aral Sea actually can no longer really be done. So what are its goals? What dues should each pay, and so on. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Nice and brief. Okay, Ariel, what is the single biggest water-related challenge in Central Asia, in your opinion?
The infrastructure modernization, as I mentioned, it will cost billions of dollars and retraining of thousands and tens of thousands of people. Sorry. If the countries move to drip irrigation, piping instead of open canals, that water just seeps into the ground, and use modern technology. It costs money, but it will save lots and lots of water and makes water management more sustainable. Also, the big question mark is the cotton industry of Uzbekistan. There are alternatives. There are fruits, vegetables, nuts that can replace cotton. Is it easy to manage that? No, but the alternative is just to have this wasteful water consuming culture. The other thing, as we saw elsewhere in the world, you can use what is called gray water in raising cotton. So the water that is used in households and whatnot and filtered, then it can be used in cotton growth. That will save a lot of water as well.
Thank you. Dr. Hill, the paper focuses on the importance of cooperation within the Central Asian 5 countries. What do you think is the easiest issue to get agreement on to help improve water security?
Well, the easiest issue is definitely any infrastructure projects that get multiple actors on board. So, for example, as a general rule in any international organization, you start with the easy things like putting solar panels over a canal. Now, that may be expensive, it may be difficult to secure investors, though since the report has been published, there has been some progress on this with investors from the Gulf and South Korea expressing interest in this. But this is not an issue that requires mutual sacrifice or consideration of deep political interests. This is very basic coordination, putting solar panels over the canals so that there's less evaporation, and they also have more energy, as Alejandro mentioned. That type of cross-border infrastructure project is where this cooperation needs to start, because these are things that just have added benefits. And once that there is a rhythm of cooperation established, then we can talk about, and they can talk about things like reducing usage, because then when you talk about anybody cutting back usage, you run into problems of, well, they used more, well, I need this more, etc.
Thank you. Dr. Sanchez, the report suggests that Central Asian states should engage the international community, especially the U.S. and EU. Why should the U.S. and Europe be interested in water resources in Central Asia?
Great question. I'm going to answer it like this. I'm going to give an idealistic answer and then a pragmatic one. The idealistic one is that on July 28, 2010, the United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution which declared that access to safe and clean drinking water and sanitation is a human right. So any government that cares about human rights, environmental protection, and water security should care about the situation in Central Asia. That's the idealistic answer. The more pragmatic one is that, as I mentioned before in my remarks, every time we talk about, often whenever we talk about U.S. international relations, for example, we focus more on a big picture, right? We talk about presidential summits, meetings between ministers, a Business 5+1 initiative that happened last year. There was a critical minerals dialogue that occurred for the first time, I think, in February 2024. We need to diversify engagement between the United States and Central Asia. Water security, environmental protection as a whole is a low-cost, high-impact type of initiative that will not only improve and increase and strengthen relations between the United States and Central Asia, but also it will improve the image the United States has among the Central Asian population. So it's not just about having more presidents, ministers, entrepreneurs want to engage in the United States, but we also want the people of Central Asia to see the United States as a friend. And I think the same thing can be applied for Europe, South Korea, and Japan, which are two other regions that we haven't talked about. I think that would be the other reason. And of course, like Ariel said, Europe should have a specific interest in protecting the Caspian Sea because it is a critical artery of the Middle Corridor, which is used to transport goods from Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan to Baku port and from then to Europe.
Thank you. Okay, Dr. Cameron, you've written extensively about the environmental history of Central Asia, not an easy one. In your view, how can Central Asian states better leverage their water resources to reverse some of the environmental degradation of the past, especially the Soviet past?
Sure. Well, I'll come back to one of the themes of the report. So the way the Soviet system was designed was often kind of on a hub and spoke model, right? So that these different republics reported back to Moscow. It wasn't one that necessarily privileged regional cooperation. And I think Americans, unfortunately, know much less than they should about Central Asia. And we often have this sort of tendency to stereotype Central Asia as a whole, whereas, of course, we know that these countries are really quite different, actually. They have different interests, different cultures, and they also have different water resources, as the report made clear, right? You have some countries, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, that are very water rich, and others that are on the inflow of these rivers. So I would return to the issue of regional cooperation, strengthening some of these regional organizations, thinking about also how any water agreements might be enforced, and also thinking about if there are agreed upon limits in terms of water, what then compensation might be given to these countries that that are not using as much water. I think in terms of sort of the causes of this, in my own view, I'm a historian. I have studied this period over the course of the Soviet era. Really, I think most of the upsurge in water use is really due to agriculture. It's not, as far as I can see from the data that I've looked at, that most of these countries are, that is where the water goes. Some 75% of it is going. So I think that's where efforts really need to focus. The last 2 points I would make is, other ways to think more about regional cooperation. One would be regional expertise sharing. So I've been struck actually in my work around the Aral Sea how sometimes experts and local experts, Kazakhstani experts who are doing, say, tree planting, are not actually talking to Uzbekistani experts who are doing tree planting. So I think more of that kind of regional expertise sharing, because these are similar environments. We might think of also regional sharing across international borders. When I met with some officials from IFAS, International Fund for Saving the Aral Sea, they were really interested in sharing expertise with, say, US experts working on the shrinking of the Great Salt Lake, because these are very similar cases. So, that's another area of potential work. Last point might also be greater work on the coordination of international donor efforts, because often there's a lot of work going on in this regard, but sometimes it's not actually very well coordinated. I was able to attend an IFA-sponsored work. I've a sponsored conference on international donor coordination work for the Aral Sea, and I was struck that this was the first time such a conference had been held in something like 6 years. So again, these different agencies didn't necessarily have a good idea of what the other one was doing, and I think with greater expertise sharing, this work could have much greater impact.
All right, we've got 12 and a half minutes. Dr. Hill, can you answer the next question in 90 seconds? That would be great help. Kazakhstan is having some success pushing the middle corridor across the Caspian Sea. Water levels are falling in that sea. How concerned should Kazakhstan and others interested in the middle corridor be about the falling water level of the Caspian? 90 seconds.
They should be especially concerned because if you look at an undersea map of the Caspian Sea, it is the areas that are very shallow, very on the edge for current depths of boats are going to dry out really fast around major ports in Aktau and Atarau, in that area in western Kazakhstan. The good news is that while there is a lot of concern, there is also a lot of vested interest in preventing this because this is a major economic artery. Goods flow across the Caspian Sea from Kazakhstan and then through the South Caucasus and beyond as a means of avoiding transit through Russia, which is increasingly important since sanctions against Russia. So it's an important issue, but thankfully there are lots of eyes on it.
Admirably brief. Same for you, Ariel, Dr. Cohn. You talked already about the Soviet-era dams on the Volga River. How do you look at the problem of Caspian's water levels? Oops, looks like, actually, we've lost them.
Oh, okay.
My apologies, I should not have raised that. All right, so the last question, again. Mr. Sanchez, how should multilateral organizations engage with Central Asian countries on water resources?
I would say that they have to identify the priorities, and I think like Sarah already talked about how there needs to be more donor coordination. But I think there's some issues that across all 5 Central Asian countries that we can all agree on. For example, Uzbekistan's reliance on the cotton industry. If the multilateral organizations not only need to convince Uzbekistan, for example, to improve water management, they also have to convince Uzbek leaders to decrease their reliance on cotton. That's a big task. Also, a common problem across all the Central Asian countries is that they all rely on Soviet-era canal systems, water pipelines, and reservoirs. They need to either be overhauled or expanded. And something that Ariel mentioned, which I think is very important, is that there are now more people in Central Asia than there were like 20 years ago or 50 years ago. So you need to put more pipelines in the ground for them to reach the bigger populations that you have, not only in the urban areas, but also across the major small communities across the country. Finally, very quickly, I actually agree pretty much with what Sarah was talking about when it comes to education. It's not just about USAID, if it exists in the next couple of years, or the environment, or the the World Bank, or the IMF, or the Asian Development Bank, for them to invest on building pipelines and reservoirs. They also need to educate more, raise awareness. They also need to train water technicians and specialists. They need to. So I think that's something that multilateral organizations can really have very much success, is providing scholarships for the next generation of water technicians in Central Asia so that they want to study either domestically or, for example, go to Europe or the United States or Canada or South Korea or Japan, wherever, have a good education so when they go back home and they begin working, they can really help their country.
Thank you. Okay, audience questions. We have question over here. And please identify yourself, stand up.
Hello, I'm Jill Baggerman. I'm with the U.S. Institute of Peace, Central Asia and Afghanistan team, and I'm also formerly with the UNECE Water Convention. And so my question is about the partnerships and essentially what about UNECE Water Convention? When I ask Tajiks, Afghans, and Kyrgyz about this, they have typically said something along the lines of, well, that's for downstream countries. And so I'm especially interested in your take, since as you point out that Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan are actually middle riparian states. And so how would that change the calculation, in particular for all of the support that the Water Convention has on the technical, legal, and cooperation level for the water, energy, food, and ecosystems nexus. And quick
Please,
second
no,
point.
no, no, please. So let's have a chance, all right? Answer that question, please. Who wants to take it?
Do you want to? Okay, I'll
Jump
take
in.
it. So the UN Water Convention is unfortunately unevenly adhered to in the region. And countries in the region are looking towards other broad trends of regional integration, like the C5, C5+1, the Green 5, Blue 5. There's a whole rainbow I could go through eventually, I'm sure. The end result is that a lot of these international agreements that sort of hold weight legally but aren't practically enforced are basically legal fictions at this point. And it's not that they're not important, it's not that they couldn't be useful, it's that there are more practical mechanisms that have political backing inside and outside of these countries, investor interest inside and outside of these countries, and enthusiasm, because they're the great new thing. People are enthusiastic about the C5 system and all of the things that come out of it. Unfortunately, the UN has, I think, an undeservedly bad reputation in a lot of areas, and that stymies cooperation in this regard.
And I agree with what he said. I'm going to just add another example of another document that's important regarding water issues, but it's not being properly applied. And that's the Tehran Convention. That was signed in 2003 between the 5 Caspian Sea states. It's aimed at protecting the environment, the Caspian Sea environment, and it's not being very applied. I think it was like 6 or 7 years ago in 2018, I believe, where the Aktau Convention was signed in Kazakhstan between the 5 Caspian states, and that was supposed to be put an end to the border dispute between the 5 countries over the Caspian Sea. I thought at the time, I was optimistic at the time that, well, now that the 5 Caspian countries have resolved their border differences, now the Tehran Convention can increase its relevancy because now they can all work together to protect and save the Caspian Sea. That has not happened. So there are plenty of documents around, there are plenty of treaties, declarations, conventions that are not being properly applied, and that's definitely a big shame.
Okay, one more question from the audience.
Martha Holder. I retired World Bank and I worked on the Central Asia Energy Water Program. So it's interesting to hear that some things have not changed, but really. But just lessons learned from and I think I was part of the last meeting that happened, a conference that happened 6 years ago or more, I think it's 8 years now. It's heartwarming to hear that the German-Kazakh program is still operational, because that made a really big difference. Because of the time that we started the program, it was really for energy and water, it was for Rogan hydropower. And even that, because of climate change or the changing climate, that has changed the dynamic of hydropower a lot. So even that is, the dynamic there is already changing. So I think really the cooperation aspect is the new generation. But what really is going to matter is the economic incentives for it. So I think we had a trade show on water technologies, which really is going to make a difference. And I think that is critical. Cooperation only happens if there's economic reasons to in this area. And secondly, including Afghanistan. We had Afghanistan, because Afghanistan is being considered, or has within the bank, but is South Asia. And it really considers itself as part of Central Asia. And we had them at all our meetings and conferences, and they sent their highest level people because they were very concerned about northern Afghanistan and that canal that now has been, and they have 30% of the water of the Amudarya. So it's really a very critical player and needs to be included in the dialogue. So those are my 2 takeaways.
Thank you. 30-second comment to that.
I would say that in talking about investment, that you're absolutely correct. Getting outside actors involved in the region, economic cooperation, is ultimately what's going to solve the water issues. And it's also what has enabled partial solutions to already emerge, middle corridor, et cetera. I think what's interesting and what's maybe new is that Japan, South Korea, Israel, and Turkey, these middle powers with their own aspirations, are increasingly the largest investors in the region and in these types of projects, and that's something to keep an eye on.
Okay, I'm going to take 2 questions from the virtual audience, and I'll put them both out there, and then we'll take quick answers to them. The first is from Michael Launer. If hostilities break out over water resources, for example, between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, would Russia remain neutral or take sides? That's question 1. 2, from Diane Skinner. With the future of USAID uncertain, what are the alternate methods the U.S. can use to remain engaged on water issues in Central Asia? Okay, anyone want to volunteer on the first one?
When it comes to the Kyrgyzstan, I'm sorry, please go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so really quickly, when it comes to Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, well, Russia didn't take a side last time when they had the initial border disputes between 2023 to 2024, more or less. Russia does have a base in Tajikistan. I think it was the 201st Rifle Brigade were there. I'm not sure how many troops remained there because there were so many of them were sent to Ukraine. I don't think there are so many. We already have the experience of the Armenia-Azerbaijan war as a kind of example that Russia maybe doesn't want to take too much of a side. Maybe they will take a side with the government that is more friendly towards them as compared to the other one. I think that will be my short answer. But I think, like, especially right now in 2025, with Ukraine approaching its third anniversary at this point, then I don't think Russia is in a position to send a military deployment to Central Asia to take a side either for the Kyrgyz or the Tajiks, and that even includes Wagner.
Thank you. Dr. Cameron, you want to address the second question?
Sure. Just one short point. The issue of Russia was brought up a couple times. I have not seen, at least particularly my work on the RLC, Russia taking a major interest. But one point I would note is that, and this is a Soviet-era legacy, that a lot of the people, and by this I mean really the scientists who have expertise about these things, they're in Russia. And so they really are the people who kind of understand kind of the geology, the ichthyologists, and so on. And so that expertise is still important, and that dialogue is actually still going on. So one is still able to talk to them. They're still involved in the area, but the Russian state is not involved in these things. Alternate methods, I have been thinking about this myself a bit because it's been quite a dramatic recent turn of events. I think maybe one way might be to partner with some of the educational institutions in the region, right? So there's been a big growth of institutions. I'm just thinking American University of Central Asia, Nazarbayev University. Many of these already have international partnerships. Maybe that would be something to kind of bolster and to draw upon to kind of develop the next generation of water experts, much along the lines of, again, the Kazakh German University is a wonderful, really, really amazing program, actually. And it's not just Kazakhstani water experts who are being trained there, but students coming from all over Central Asia who are being trained in that master's program.
Terrific. We are finishing on time. I'd like to thank our report authors and our panelists for a very interesting conversation, a critical conversation, which does not get as much here. Thanks everyone for coming in personally and for those who've tuned in virtually. And we'll be doing more on Central Asia and water in the future. Thank you all.